In this last unit, we're going to be covering important concepts from several other areas of geography, specifically political organization of space, agricultural patterns and processes, and urban geography. So we're going to call this state, town, and country. The first part of this last unit is going to be political geography. People often use the words country, state, and nation to mean the same thing, but they have different meanings. Country is the most general term. It's often used to describe any political entity that is independent from the control of any other entity. State and nation have much more precise meanings. Political units exist at various scales. In the United States, for example, a person resides in several political units at once, maybe a town or city, a county, a state, and finally, in the country as a whole. Note that the term state can be confusing because it can be used in two different ways. In this example, it refers to one of the 50 states that makes up the United States. But in the area of international relations, a state is the largest political unit. It's the formal term for a country, and it has to meet specific criteria. It has a defined boundary, it contains a permanent population, it maintains sovereignty over its domestic and international affairs, and it's recognized by other states. The United States recognizes 195 states that are based on these criteria. But the number can vary depending on which government or international organization is making the list. These four requirements are easily defined, but in the geopolitical arena, they can be difficult to recognize. Consider the complicated relationship between the People's Republic of China and the nearby island of Taiwan. In 1949, China ended a long civil war. The victorious communist forces led by Mao Zedong established their capital in Beijing. About 2 million supporters of the losing side, known as the Nationalists, retreated to Taiwan. China was divided between two governments, one on the mainland and one in Taiwan, that each considered itself China's legitimate ruler. The government on the mainland never gave up its claim on Taiwan, and Taiwan never declared independence. Today, Beijing rules more than 1 billion residents. Taiwan rules about 24 million, but it manages its own affairs and has diplomatic relations with about 20 countries. Sovereignty, the power of a political unit to rule over its own affairs, is a key principle in understanding how these units function. In order for a political unit to have legitimacy, it must have sovereignty. Sovereignty may be challenged on the global or local scale. China's claim that Taiwan is nothing more than a renegade province is a direct challenge to Taiwan's sovereignty, and since Taiwan is recognized by so few other states, it seems to be an effective challenge. Largely because of China's opposition, Taiwan is not a member of the UN. So the case can be made that Taiwan does not fully meet the third and fourth criteria that I mentioned before. Often the term nation is interchangeably used with country. However, the terms are not identical. In general, a nation is a group of people who have certain things in common. They share a common cultural heritage, they have beliefs and values that help unify them, they claim a particular space based on tradition as their homeland, and desire to establish their own state or express self-determination in another way. Depending on how tightly one applies these standards, the number of nations ranges from a few hundred to several thousand. Many political entities combine aspects of nationhood and statehood. A singular nation of people who fulfill the qualifications of a state form a nation-state. Among the best examples of nation-states are Iceland and Japan. Icelanders make up 94% of its total population of 300,000. Scandinavian settlers founded Iceland on an island that had no indigenous population. Japanese account for 99% of the total population of its 128 million permanent residents. A strong national identity coupled with strict immigration policies have maintained Japan as a nation-state. A multinational state is a country that contains more than one nation. Most multinational states consist of one dominant nation that controls most of the political power. Numerous multinational states fit these criteria, including Canada. While the English language culture dominates, about 25% of Canadians speak French primarily. Most live in the province of Quebec. In an effort to prevent Quebec from demanding independence, the national government passed legislation making Canada a bilingual state and gave the province increased local autonomy in government and education. Similarly, the Canadian government granted more autonomy over local affairs and natural resources to the Indigenous nations. As a part of this effort, it created the territory of Nunavut in 1999. Nunavut is in the far north of Canada. Over 80% of the population consider themselves Inuit. A defined area within a state that has a high degree of self-government and freedom from its parent state is sometimes known as an autonomous region. States often grant this authority to geographically, ethnically, or culturally distinct areas. For example, Åland is a group of islands in the Baltic Sea. It is part of Finland, but lies near Sweden. Most residents are ethnically Swedish and speak that language. A desire to join Sweden after World War I was submitted to the League of Nations. The League ruled that Åland should remain part of Finland, but as a non-militarized, largely self-governing entity, which it still is today. Since the world consists of far more nations than states, many nations do not have a state of their own, although they often have a political organization. These cultural groups that have no independent political entity are called stateless nations. Stateless nations seeking to become independent states include the Palestinians and the Basque. The largest stateless nation belongs to the Kurdish people, spread among 6 states in Southwest Asia, Turkey, Armenia, Iraq, Iran, Azerbaijan, and Syria. The Kurds number between 25 million and 30 million people in an area called Kurdistan. As states such as Syria and Iraq become destabilized in the 2000s, ethnic Kurds intensified their push for their own independent country. A multi-state nation occurs when a nation has a state of its own but stretches across borders of other states. For example, most Hungarians live in Hungary, but many live in the Transylvania region of Romania. The Korean nation is divided primarily between 2 states, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which we know as North Korea, and the Republic of Korea, which we know as South Korea, but with large numbers in China and the United States.